In this chapter, we're going to create the code to create an IndexedDB database and to build the structure. All right, and we're going to write the callbacks if we're connected or if there's an error, and then if we have time, we'll move on to the adding, being able to add values to the database. All right, so this page is the documentation, which is basically a guide on using IndexedDB. It goes through the whole process of basically creating it, adding, updating, and deleting values. Okay, so here's the basic pattern when using IndexedDB. You'll open the database, okay, then you'll create an object store in upgrading the database. Okay, now there's a method called onUpgradeNeeded that we're going to use, and you just need to specify a new version number if you want to update the structure of the database. And if that sounds confusing, I'll show you how to do that in a few minutes. Then you'll start a transaction and make a request to do some database operation like adding or retrieving data. Okay, then you'll wait for the operation to complete by listening to the right kind of DOM event, and then you'll do something with the results, which can be found in the request object. All right, so let's go scroll down here a little bit to opening a database. Actually, let's look at this first. So you can test to see if your browser allows IndexedDB, if you can use the API with this simple call. Alright, so you might want to use that and then just send out an alert if the user's browser doesn't support it. Alright, so opening a database is very easy. We're just going to create a variable, okay, in this case request, and we're going to set it to window.indexeddb.open. We're going to use this open method, which takes two parameters. It takes the name of the database and the version. So this is where you want to change this to run the onUpgradeNeeded function. Alright, now before I keep going here, I'm going to actually create some of the code. Alright, so we want to go to our main.js. Now we're going to use jQuery. In this example in this guide, it's just using straight JavaScript, but I think it's a little easier if we use jQuery. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is make sure that the document is ready. Alright, so we're going to say document.ready, and then in here we're going to have a function, and this is where we want basically our init code, our initializer. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is open the database. Okay, so like the guide says, we're going to create a variable called request and set that to indexeddb.open. Okay, and then we want a name for our database. I'm just going to call it Customer Manager. And then we want the version, which I'm going to just start with version 1. Okay, so very similar to this code. Now I left out the window. You don't need to use this window. Alright, so it's perfectly fine without it. Alright, so let's go down here. Now when opening the database, you want to define these callbacks for on error and on success. So if it connects to the database, this will run. If there's some kind of error, this will run. Alright, so let's go ahead and create those, and we're going to stay within the document ready function. Okay, so we'll do success first. Okay, so what we're going to do here is take that request object, say request dot on success equals function. Alright, so let's do a little console log. Okay, so we'll just console log a success message. Alright, and then what we want to do is create our basically our database handle. So DB is going to be equal to E, which we need to put in here, okay, for our event. So E dot target dot result, okay, and we can use that DB when we run transactions. All right, and then what I want to do if we connect is to show customers. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just throw in a function here that we'll create in a little bit. Okay, so it's going to try to connect. If it does, it's going to tell us in the console. It's going to create this DB variable, and it's going to call this show customers function. Okay, let's create the error handler. So we want our request object dot on error. Alright, so for the error, all I'm going to do is do a console log. Of course, you'll probably want a more in-depth error handler, but this isn't going to be a major application. Okay, so we'll say could not open database. Alright, so there's our success and error callbacks. Now what I'm going to do is create that on upgrade needed function. And let me just find it in this. Okay, so basically this is what we just created. Request. We're going to open a database. If it doesn't, they put the error first. I always put the success callback first and then the error. Alright, so creating or updating the version of the database, and this is that function I was talking about, on upgrade needed. Alright, so let's just go through this real quick. When you create a new database or you increase the version number of an existing database, the on upgrade needed event will be triggered. In the handler for this event, you should create the object stores needed for this version of the database. So this is where we want to create our object store. Okay, so we'll have the function. Same thing, we're going to have this equal to DB to event target result, and then we're going to create a variable for the object store, and this is how you can create it. Alright, so you want basically an object store. If you're familiar with relational databases, you can kind of compare it to a table. Alright, so we're going to create an object store called customers. Alright, now in here you can specify the second parameter is a set of options. Okay, so we have a key path, which is basically going to be it's going to be the field that you want to use as a primary key. Alright, it should be something where each value is unique. I wouldn't suggest using a name or something like that because you may have two of the same. And you can also specify if you want it to auto increment. This example doesn't, but in our code we're going to have it set to auto increment. Alright, so let's basically do what's right there. Alright, so request dot on upgrade needed equal to a function Alright, and I want to pass in an event variable, and I should have done that here as well. Alright, so we'll say variable DB is going to be equal to E dot target dot result, Alright, so what I want to do before we create the customer's object store, I want to check and see if there is one already created. Okay, so we're going to do a little if statement here. Okay, so we're going to say if not db dot object store names dot contains. Okay, so basically we're just going to check for the name of customers, then we can do what we want to do. Okay, so now what I want to do is create, we're going to have a variable for the object store. I'm just going to call it OS. Alright, and we're going to say equal to db dot create object store. Okay, so first parameter we want the name, which is going to be customers. Alright, and then the second is going to be our options. Okay, so key path is going to basically be our primary key, and I'm going to set that to a field called ID. Alright, now I want to put a comma here because we want a second parameter of auto increment. Okay, so auto increment true. Alright, so now we're going to create our callbacks for this function. So after the ending curly brace, we're going to say request Alright, so let's go ahead and console log. Database was open, and I'm going to say DB. Actually, wait a minute, we already did this. I'm sorry about that. We already did this up here. I'm actually going to put this above the callbacks. Just makes a little more sense in my mind, at least. Alright, so every time you increase this number, which is the version number, this will run. Alright, this isn't going to run aside from the first time unless you upgrade this. Alright, so if you put a 2 there, it'll run again. So let's just save this and go to our app. Now if we go to Chrome Tools with F12, you can see if you click on the Resources tab, we have all our client storage methods over here, including IndexedDB. And you can see that it's already there because I've already run it. Let's just reload this. Okay, so if we click on this IndexedDB, we have the name of our objects, our database, and you can see over here we get a little bit of information, the name, the version, and the security origin, which is basically the domain, and then we have our object store, which is customers, and then we have our fields, our name and email. Alright, now sometimes this area in Chrome Tools gets a little buggy, and it won't show the correct thing. It might not show some values, or it might show this the name of the database more than once. So you can't always go by this here. Alright, but when you have your application built, you'll be able to see that everything's fine from within the application. So I think I'm going to stop here. We get it set up. In the next video, we'll create the functionality where we can use the form to actually add to this database.